Hello and welcome to my show, Shuvra Deb with you, with me, your host, Shuvra Deb. In this show, I will be discussing mental health with the aim of raising mental health awareness in our community and in society as a whole. The genesis of the show is my own pivotal life-changing experience of being in a Category 5 hurricane back in 2017. That experience led me to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. I am hosting this show in order to let you know that you are not alone if something life-changing has happened to you from which you are struggling to heal. Shuvra Deb with you focuses on a range of topics relevant to mental health and to raising awareness of issues surrounding mental health. Hello everyone and welcome back to my show, Shuvra Deb with you. I hope that you're all doing really well and settling into the new year. I am definitely now starting to get back into the swing of things and I'm enjoying settling back into my routines and practices. As you all know by now, I'm sure, for those of you also who are tuning in for the first time, you'll want to know that my show is about raising awareness around the topic of mental health. I want us all to be living in a society where looking after our own mental health and the mental health of those we love and care about is no longer stigmatized, as is currently the case in society. I want us all to live in a world where we no longer make the distinction between mental and physical health, and where each and every aspect of our health is considered in an inclusive and holistic way. Whilst my show is about raising awareness around the topic of mental health, I do want to make it very clear that I'm not a mental health professional and I'm not a doctor. If you do need to seek professional help, then I wholeheartedly encourage you to do that, and we have a good number of options here in the Cayman Islands. Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services and can be reached on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support to people up to the age of 30, and their information is on their website, alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices provides mental health support, and their number is 922-3847, and their email is info@lsv.support. And I love hearing what you guys have to say about my discussion topics, so please do reach out to me with your comments, questions, feedback. If there's something that you'd like me to talk about or not talk about, then please let me know. You can get me on my email, which is shuvradeb82@gmail.com. That's shuvradeb82@gmail.com, spelt SHUVRADEB, the numbers 82@gmail.com. And I have some super exciting news. My podcast has launched. Shuvra Deb with you is now available on Spotify and will soon be available on Apple Podcasts and on Google. Please do go ahead, look me up and start listening, and you can do so on demand. Please do subscribe, share and review the show. I really appreciate all of your feedback, so please do let me know your views. And tell your friends about my show if you're enjoying my content. On today's show, I am going to review some of my favourite books, which I think you guys will enjoy reading in 2023. The reason I want to deliver this show now, at this time of year, is that if you are looking for books to read in 2023, then now is a great time to get going on that book list. I will be talking to you about 5 books that have inspired me in the last year or so. Some of these books I came across years ago, but they have been so meaningful to me and have helped me so much that I would like to share them with you in the hope that they can help you too. These books are the kind of books that I find myself going back to, either to reread in their entirety or as sources into which I can dip in and out. So what are these books? The first one is The Power of the Heart by Baptiste de Pape. The second book is The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. The third book is Being Ram Dass by Ram Dass and Rameshwar Das. Discover Your Dharma by Sahara Rose is the fourth book, and Make Your Bed by Admiral William McRaven is the fifth book. So the first book, which I'm going to discuss, is Baptiste de Pape's The Power of the Heart. The reason I'm opening with this book is because this book may actually be the book that started the spiritual journey I am on now. Albeit I didn't qualify as a Reiki healer until 2018, 3 years prior to that, I was at an airport in India in 2015. I went into the bookstore, as I do at any and all airports that have bookstores. And I recalled from previous trips to India that bookstores there, bookstores out on the street in Kolkata, as well as the stores in the airports, would often carry little gems. And these books were available in the UK, where I lived back then, but I could buy the same books for a lot less in India. And that somehow made it feel like a naughty little treat to be buying these books in India. In that airport bookstore, I admit I was drawn to Baptiste de Pape's book initially because I judged the book by its cover. The book jacket, or sleeve, is a beautiful deep red colour with a photograph of the sea. It's as if the observer is looking out to sea when looking at that book jacket. And the whole red colour thing just drew me in, as I love the colour red. But hey, who's judging? The whole red-coloured book jacket thing worked an absolute treat, drawing me in just when exactly I needed to be. This book came along at just the right time for me. I came across The Power of the Heart just before I left the UK and moved to the Caribbean. At that point in time, I was feeling incredibly disconnected. Disconnected from myself, other people, my surroundings. And the worst of those disconnections was the disconnection from myself. Looking back at that period in my life, I had actually been feeling that way for a few years, and I didn't know why I felt so disconnected, why I couldn't fully engage with the life that I was living. I realize now in hindsight that Baptiste de Pape's The Power of the Heart helped me to start feeling reconnected to myself again. What's so beautiful about this book is that it is one of the best compilations I have come across of spiritual teachers' teachings containing excerpts of some of the great guidance that they have given over the years. As such, it's a great introductory book for anyone wishing to become more spiritual, for anyone seeking their purpose in life, or for anyone wishing to be more present in the here and now, in the moment that is. The Power of the Heart is short, very accessible, and an easy read. It's the perfect type of book for dipping in and out. Equally, it is divided into parts and chapters, giving it a structure so you can read it through from start to finish. Between the author's contributions are quotations that are interspersed throughout the book from many great spiritual leaders, including Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, Maya Angelou, and Gary Zukav, to name just a few. Chapter 2, called Heart and Soul, gets right into the topic of the power of the heart. Baptiste de Pape cites Deepak Chopra, who says, "It's an old Indian story that God wanted to hide the truth and said, I want to make it interesting for people, and the one place I want to put it in is their hearts, because they look everywhere else, only to discover later that the truth is in their hearts." Baptiste de Pape goes on to say about this, "Many people spend their whole lives searching for fulfillment and happiness, often expecting to find it in the purchase of a beautiful house, a luxury car, or other material possessions. But when their satisfaction with these wears off, they look for other things to fill the emptiness. They change jobs, go on expensive vacations, or find a new life partner. Yet, as Santiago in The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho, discovers, the greatest treasure, your true source of happiness and fulfillment, is inside you, within your heart." Now, that's not to say that there is at all anything bad or wrong with having a beautiful home, a luxury car, or changing jobs or life partner when those relationships may truly have run their course or just weren't quite right. I think what Deepak Chopra and Baptiste de Pape are saying with these words is that the source of happiness is not external. Happiness does not come from the beautiful house, luxury car, job, or life partner change. Whilst you may want or need any or all of those things, happiness comes from the internal. It comes from within. By tapping into our hearts, we feel and sense our authentic, true selves. On my last show, I talked about something that one of my mentors, Paul Selig, said during a session I was in with him at the end of last year at the retreat, Blue Spirit, Costa Rica. And it's something that's really stuck with me, and is something that I feel we can use in our day-to-day lives when either we are unsure about something, or when we want to tap into our heart and seek guidance from our own inner compass, what we call intuition. Tapping into and following our intuition will serve us so well, as it empowers us to make our best decisions for ourselves without always having to rely on other people for guidance. And the way we connect in with our intuition is to tap into our hearts. This will help us to distinguish between those moments when we know something in the sense of knowledge or when we know something in the sense of how it feels. Now, Paul Selig says this much more eloquently than I'm about to, but the idea is that in order to see the difference between whether we are in a knowing state or whether we are in a feeling state, is to imagine back to a time when we knew for a fact about something, for example, what we had had for last night's dinner. Do that, and then ask yourself how that feels. It probably just is. You know what you had, let's say steak for dinner last night, and there's not much more to it than that. Now, instead, think back to a time when you felt something, when you really felt something. A kiss with a lover, the moment your baby was born, your graduation from college. Being back in that moment probably felt very different to being back in the moment of knowing about your steak dinner. So, the difference between knowing and really knowing, which is feeling something, can be demonstrated by how different these two knowings feel. The knowing of what you had for your dinner versus the knowing of the depths of feeling at that kiss, the birth of your child, or your college graduation. I said last week that for me, when I have that kind of feeling knowing, as opposed to the factual knowing, I feel it in my heart. Sometimes I also feel it in my stomach. And sometimes, if it's really powerful, I feel it in my heart and in my stomach. Baptist Pape, in The Power of the Heart, concludes each chapter with a contemplation based on the chapter's topic. These contemplations are a great way of tapping into your heart energy, of connecting or maybe reconnecting with your intuition. Chapter 2 of the book is called Heart and Soul. The contemplation at the end of that chapter is entitled Hearing Your Heart's Voice, and Baptist Pape gives the following contemplation, or if you like, meditation. He says, to connect with your heart, allow yourself to find a quiet place. Sit and silence your thoughts. Let your mind go blank. Just push gently to the side any thoughts that are worrying you. Breathe into the quiet of your mind, into the space you've opened there. Listen to your feelings without words. You may hear a gentle, calming voice, not with your ears, but with your feelings. It's the voice of your heart. As you listen to the inner voice of your heart, you become more attuned to your own life. You regain your sense of direction. You develop a renewed sense of who you are. You know what you want to do and why. Now, I feel that these contemplations are a great starting point for those seeking a spiritual practice. They are a great guided way of getting into spirituality and meditation and of connecting to our intuition. In the initial stages of practices like these, I found them not easy at all. The first few times I practiced these contemplations at the end of the chapters, being honest, I actually felt a little silly. Listen to my heart, I thought. Well, that's a bit strange, isn't it? I thought. But what I read in the book was the same thing essentially being said in different ways by different thought and spiritual leaders. Plus, I was feeling that deep sense of dissatisfaction with my life at that time, which I referred to earlier. So I gave it a go. I've got nothing to lose, have I thought. And I'm glad I stuck with it. While perhaps the first time I read The Power of the Heart, I didn't really think too much of it. And whilst perhaps the first few times I practiced the contemplations, I didn't really feel any changes or shifts, or indeed much of a connection with my heart. What I now see, what I now realize, what I now know in the sense of the feeling knowing and not the knowledge knowing, is that simply by reading the words, simply by going through the contemplations at the end of the chapters, those shifts, those changes were happening. Everyone has to start somewhere with everything, and that is where I started. The next book I want to talk about is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. It is an engaging and illuminating book about the author's professional experience in treating trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. On the face of it, this might seem like it's a science textbook and perhaps not a book that a non-scientist or a non-researcher or non-trauma expert would consider reading. But on the contrary, The Body Keeps the Score is anything but a specialist science book or textbook. This book is written in such a way that the author seamlessly weaves together the science behind trauma and PTSD and recovery from trauma and PTSD with extremely well narrated stories of his patients' journeys and their road to treatment for trauma and PTSD. The depictions of Dr. van der Kolk's patients are not restricted to any specific kind of trauma or PTSD experience. We get the whole gamut in his book, from Vietnam War veterans to people abused as children, to those involved in the most horrific of accidents or natural disasters. In carefully weaving together the science and the very, very human stories behind each incidence of trauma and PTSD, Dr. van der Kolk displays such intense compassion and understanding that I certainly felt that the people he speaks of could be someone I know and care about. They could be anyone any of us know and care about. And that's why this book is so important in my view. The ways in which and circumstances that can lead a person to experience trauma and then suffer its effects, sometimes for years, even decades, are so far-reaching and varied that Dr. van der Kolk's patients could be any one of us. They could be our best friend, our sister, our father, our mother. They could be us. The Body Keeps the Score speaks to the heart of trauma. It teases out and illuminates how and why humans can become traumatized and can come to suffer with PTSD. It then relays the many and varied treatment methods that are available for dealing with trauma and PTSD, many of which treatments Dr. van der Kolk pioneered himself. A review written in September 2021 in the British broadsheet newspaper The Guardian states that as at that date, since the book's publication, The Body Keeps the Score had spent 147 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, selling more than 500,000 copies in the UK alone and around 2 million copies worldwide. The Guardian review, written by Zoe Williams, goes on to say, "Part of the commercial imperative in psychiatry has been the drive to find one thing that works for everyone, a Fordist factory line approach to the brain that has seen millions spent on figuring out, for instance, what works best between pharmaceuticals and talking therapies, or between one therapy and another." Dr. van der Kolk's insistence that no single treatment is likely to work alone, and no combination will be exactly the same for every patient, is iconoclastic enough on its own. Yet, it is his engagement with what you would loosely classify as hippie stuff, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, yoga bodywork and touch, that shows how unperturbed he is in going beyond the realm of classic psychiatry. Williams continues, "His thinking on the body is so succinct and simple. If the body is storing trauma in its musculature, in its hormonal pathways, then it is the body that needs experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma, as he writes in his book. The one thing I would say, and with emphasis, about The Body Keeps the Score is that it is heavy, and I mean heavy. For many people who have experienced similar events as the patients described in Dr. van der Kolk's book, reading such graphic details of those experiences of others could be immensely triggering for the reader. So my advice to you on this one is please read this mindfully, and only if you feel you're in the right place to confront what may have happened to you without being triggered. But what is a trigger? It's a word that's used a lot at the moment. What a trigger is something that is a reminder of the event for the traumatized person. That reminder has the effect of setting off PTSD symptoms. These symptoms can come in a variety of forms, which might include flashbacks, alarm, fear, anxiety, tears, or a panic attack. Helpguide.org says that sometimes triggers are obvious. For example, a military veteran may be triggered by seeing his combat buddies or by loud noises that sound like gunfire. Some triggers are less obvious. A piece of music or song may act as a trigger, if, for example, it was playing at the time of the traumatizing event, or if a song is something that the traumatized person associates with the events that they went through. I can speak a little from personal experience on this one. For some periods of time when I was reading this book, certain chapters that I was reading were causing me to be triggered about certain events that I had experienced. Rather annoyingly, I didn't realize at the time that that's what was happening. As I read some of those chapters, I felt a sense of disconnection from my body, a sense of sadness, and if you like, even foreboding. It took me some time to work out what was going on. What was going on was that I was being triggered by a book I was reading partly for research purposes, for what, unknowingly to me at the time, would become this radio show, and partly for intellectual curiosity. Reading the book was causing me mental and emotional anguish, and at the time I couldn't identify what was going on. I then did eventually put two and two together, and as a result of that, I stopped reading the book for a time. By the time I picked up The Body Keeps the Score again, I was in a much better place and started to enjoy the book again, as I still do when I go back to it, which I do frequently. One of the ways I was able to deal with these triggers was to do exactly what the book tells us to do. Going back to what Dr. van der Kolk says about coming back to the body, and as I was discussing on my first show, Hurricane to Healing, that one of the best ways to confront and start to deal with trauma is to come back to the body. Dr. van der Kolk says in his book, the single most important issue for traumatized people is to find a sense of safety in their own bodies. If the body keeps the score, which it does, by turning to the body in those dark moments, we get to change the score that our bodies keep. Instead of the body keeping the score of our trauma in the physical response of a panic attack, rather than the body keeping the score of any childhood abuse, for example, and the resultant lack of self-worth, the lack of self-love, or the feeling that we are not loved by those closest to us. Instead of the body keeping the score of those feelings by our bodies, for example, developing lung or heart disease, instead of the body keeping that score by coming back to our body when we are feeling triggered, by coming back to our body, for example, by the very simple act of focusing on our breath, on our breathing, our bodies will start to keep a different score. By pursuing a yoga practice, we get back in touch with our breath and our bodies, allowing our bodies to keep a better score. As regards the PTSD sufferer and how that can feel, how those feelings can be vocalized, Dr. van der Kolk cites a passage from the famed wartime literature book by the German writer Erich Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front, where the protagonist in the novel says, "I am aware that I, without realizing it, have lost my feelings. I don't belong here anymore. I live in an alien world. I prefer to be left alone, not disturbed by anybody. They talk too much. I can't relate to them. They are only busy with superficial things." As to this, Dr. van der Kolk says, denial of the consequences of trauma can wreak havoc with the social fabric of society. The refusal to face the damage caused by the way and the intolerance of what was seen as weakness, Dr. van der Kolk opines, caused many of the social problems that followed the First World War. And it's not just in the larger societal consequences of untreated and unacknowledged trauma that we see how we as humans keep the score. It's on more individual levels too. My therapist, who I started seeing after Hurricane Irma, said to me, in the context of parenting and the effects that trauma have on the ability of someone to be a parent, what Jen, my therapist, said was, imagine you, that's me, had had a baby when in that post-Irma state of suffering PTSD. Would you, she said to me, have been able to care for and love the child as fully and as capably as if I was not in that state of PTSD? My answer to this was, no, I wouldn't have been capable of doing that job quite so well. A traumatized parent can only care for their child from their place of trauma. So, by not acknowledging and treating our trauma and PTSD, it's not just our bodies that keep the score, it's the relationships we have with everyone, our wife, husband, mother, child, friend, employer, employee, co-worker, the list goes on. What The Body Keeps the Score does is that it normalizes mental illness, trauma, PTSD, and the need for treatment of mental illness. This book may even be the first of its kind, where something as sensitive and still as taboo as mental illness is given a mainstream platform. You can't get more mainstream than the New York Times bestseller list, after all. So, the popularity of this book gives me hope that we as a society are moving towards embracing mental health as part of a holistic view on overall health, and that we are progressing towards acknowledging the importance of maintaining our mental health. Surely the score we want our bodies to keep is one of recovery, one of joy, one of acceptance, where our daily life experience is not a panic attack, but a sense of calm and of peace. On to my third book, which I recommend to you. I picked up Being Ram Dass by Ram Dass and Rameshwar Das in Costa Rica at Blue Spirit Costa Rica when I was there last November. There are so many things to love about this book. What the authors write is essentially Ram Dass's life story, his autobiography in his own words. The blurb opens with a description of Ram Dass better than any way I could describe him. The opening words inside the book's jacket are, "Perhaps no other teacher has sparked the fires of as many spiritual seekers in the West as Ram Dass. If you've ever embraced the phrase, 'be here now,' practice meditation or yoga, supported anyone in a hospice, prison or homeless center, then the story of Ram Dass is also part of your story." What I find the most fascinating about Ram Dass is actually not that he, for all intents and purposes, may be described as the father of modern spirituality in the West. What fascinates me the most about this book, about Ram Dass's journey, about his life, is that he was born in the United States, an ordinary person with an ego, just like every other human being. What fascinates me the most is that he transcended that ego side of his human condition. Ram Dass was born in 1931. His name was Richard Alpert, and he was for a time a Harvard professor in psychology. The book's sleeve goes on to describe the book as depicting Ram Dass's Odyssey. And for those who have read the book or come to read it, you will see that the word Odyssey really is an appropriate word with which to describe what the book depicts about Ram Dass's journey. The literal meaning of the word Odyssey is a long and eventful or adventurous journey or experience. Being Ram Dass depicts a colourful and full life, a life fully lived, enjoyed and experienced. I think that's another thing that I love so much about this book. It describes the real-life story of a man who is completely unafraid of taking chances, completely unafraid of taking many chances, completely unafraid of following his convictions, unafraid of upping sticks, leaving behind his comfortable home and life in the United States and hot-footing it to India in 1967. This was well before it became trendy for us Westerners to fly off to India in our gap year and to travel and perhaps even find ourselves. This was a time in India where communications between the Eastern and Western worlds didn't really exist. Domestic flights in a country the mammoth size of India were yet to be mainstream, and all travel was by road or rail, comprising journeys which often took days and days to complete, depending on where the traveller was going. Messages between East and West would most frequently be by letter or telegram, and that could take weeks, days, even months to arrive, depending on where in India one was located. Perhaps placing a long-distance telephone call was possible, but it would cost the earth. Certainly that was the case in the late 1970s and early 1980s when my parents were newly arrived immigrants in the United Kingdom from India. I can't imagine the communication situation to have been any better in the late 1960s, some 10 years prior. So giving up a comfortable life in the US and essentially moving to India really was a very big deal back then. But before the move to India came, Ram Dass's early career was punctuated by family members and fellow Harvard professors encouraging, even pressurizing him to follow a path as a psychiatrist and not a psychologist. This was an era when psychology was still a bit too bohemian, a bit too out there and not quite conventional enough. Mental illnesses were there to be diagnosed, categorized, and treated with conventional pharmaceutical pills, or even electric shock therapy, or worse, in the form of treatment by way of lobotomizing a patient. Having resisted that pressure, Ram Dass went on to have a successful Harvard career. After that came his great odyssey to India, where under the tutelage and guidance of an Indian spiritual guru, Neem Karoli Baba, more fondly referred to as Maharaji, Ram Dass came to cultivate a life in an ashram before moving back to the United States and bringing all of his teachings with him back to the West. An ashram is a place of spiritual or religious retreat. And Ram Dass says this about his time in the ashram where he was. He says, "Practicing yoga daily for months, I began to feel internal changes. I was doing asanas, the physical poses of hatha yoga, slowly, not strenuously, and practicing pranayama breathing exercises morning and evening. I felt lighter and lighter. My mind grew quieter and quieter." I have spoken on numerous shows about the benefits of having a meditation or a yoga practice or both. At the molecular level of our body's existence, having a meditation, yoga or breathwork practice promotes calmness and a stress-free life. By being still, by pausing through the practice of yoga, meditation or breathwork, we are reprogramming our parasympathetic nervous system, our PNS. Cindy Dale, in her book Energy Healing for Trauma, Stress and Chronic Illness, describes the PNS as the calming and de-escalating part of our nervous system. The PNS works with the sympathetic nervous system, or the SNS. The SNS is the part of the nervous system that is the excitatory and activating part. Cindy Dale says, when prompted, the SNS immediately triggers the production of excitatory hormones, chiefly adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. This initial hormone blastoff is called the stress response and triggers the flight, freeze, fight, and fawn reactions. Now, I've talked about the fight or flight response in my previous shows. I talked about it in the context of experiencing a traumatic event and what happens to the brain and body whilst the trauma event is going on, and also what happens to the body and mind after the actual event has passed. However, activation of the fight or flight response is not just restricted to trauma events. And I spoke about this at length on my second show, Standing Still to Move Forward, which is now available on Spotify. Cindy Dale puts it really well in her book. She says, the nervous system stress response can be triggered from an external event, but it can also arise because of internal circumstances, such as an upset stomach or, and this is key, a nagging thought. That response, that brain reaction of fight or flight, also kicks in when we are stressed. When we are experiencing stress, the body releases the cortisol hormone. The effect of this is that it puts us on high alert. Being on high alert enables us to deal with the oncoming stress event, whether that's a job interview, a difficult conversation, or someone shouting at us. The Mayo Clinic, one of the leading healthcare facilities in the US, sets out the other effects of cortisol on our bodies once it's released into the bloodstream. The Mayo Clinic says, cortisol, the primary stress hormone, increases sugars, glucose, in the bloodstream. Cortisol also curbs functions that would be non-essential or harmful in a fight or flight situation. For example, a non-essential function when in fight or flight mode is hunger. When our bodies are undergoing a stressful event or situation, or there are thoughts swarming in our minds giving rise to feelings of stress, there is cortisol coursing through our bodies. And if this is happening, say, just before a mealtime, we may not feel hungry. We may therefore skip a meal. We may even be telling ourselves that we don't have enough time for that meal, that we're too busy dealing with whatever it is that's stressing us out. Any nutritionist, doctor, or physical health expert will tell us that skipping and missing meals is very bad for us. But not only that, when we are experiencing stress and the body is releasing cortisol, the Mayo Clinic goes on to state that this stress response also alters immune system responses and suppresses the digestive system, the reproductive system, and growth processes. This complex natural alarm system also communicates with the brain regions that control mood, motivation, and fear. As happens in a trauma situation where there is an external event that acts as the stressor, the same thing happens in our bodies in a non-trauma event situation when that event is one giving rise to stress. That is, that the body goes into fight or flight, releases cortisol, and makes us ready to deal with the stressor. Once that stressing event is over, what should happen is this. Cindy Dale says in her book, once the crisis is over, the body returns, or is supposed to return, to the pre-emergency relaxed state via marching orders from the parasympathetic nervous system. However, long-term and intermittent stress or really acute problems stop the PNS from kicking in. So you have the SNS that gears us up to deal with the stress. Then we have the PNS, and that calms us back down. But in PTSD sufferers and in people suffering chronic stress, the PNS ceases to function well. Therefore, the part of the nervous system, the function of which is to re-stabilize the body after the stressful event, ceases to do its job in extreme or chronic situations. This means that the parasympathetic nervous system starts to lose its ability to bring the body back down from that high awareness state, from that stress response. What this can then give rise to in chronic sufferers of stress is a number of possible body and mind reactions, including anxiety, depression, headaches, problem with the digestive system, and problems related with sleep. Being able to regulate the parasympathetic nervous system manages stress. If the regulation of the parasympathetic nervous system is working well, the risk of other health problems will be reduced, and we will generally have a better sense of wellness, both physically and mentally. And those are just the molecular or physical benefits of having a practice such as meditation. And this is just one of the things that Dr. van der Kolk talks of in The Body Keeps the Score. That is, how a trauma event can leave a physical, molecular imprint on the body. What Ram Dass describes in his account of his experience with meditation and pranayama breathwork is the next level of impact those practices have. And that next level is the way practices such as meditation, yoga, and breathwork benefit the mental and spiritual bodies that we all have. Ram Dass describes feeling lighter and lighter. He describes his mind growing quieter and quieter. And all of this helps with monitoring stress, with maintaining a calmer, more peaceful outlook on our lives. I touched on this a little in my second show, Standing Still to Move Forward. I said that if we teach our minds to be still, to be as quiet as our minds can be, even if it's just for 15 minutes a day, at least to begin with, we will find that a sense of calm, quiet, and peace starts to filter into other aspects of our life, and not just when we are sitting on the meditation mat or chair. By training our minds to be still, we are making space for moments of silence, those moments which are the gaps between our thoughts, the gaps in the internal reel of our mind chatter. We are allowing the stillness and calm to seep into more and more aspects of our lives. And the more we practice stillness, the more we try to switch off our internal mind chatter, or at least to slow it down, the more enjoyment and peace we will find, and the more we will be able to experience those gaps between our thoughts. Eckhart Tolle says, when you become conscious of these brief spaces as they happen naturally, they will lengthen, and as they do, you will experience with increasing frequency the joy of perceiving with little or no interference of thinking. Slowly, slowly, those moments in time, those gaps happen where we just are. We are not our thoughts. Those gaps will be what allows us to be more present. And by being present, we sense a calmness, a stillness, during which moments it is difficult to feel stressed about things. That is one aspect of the 3 words that Ram Dass may be the most well known for. Be here now. Be here now. 3 such simple words knitted together. And if, like me, you actually had no idea that those words you have heard from others in the past, be here now, came from Ram Dass in the first instance, then that is another great reason to read Being Ram Dass, to find out more about this extraordinary man, his extraordinary odyssey, and his sublime teachings. Another aspect of this book that I love so much is that so many of the people who Ram Dass met during his illustrious life had such utmost faith in him and such conviction in what he was doing, what he stood for, and in what he was teaching. When wishing to publish his book, Be Here Now, Ram Dass reached out to a publishing contact by the name of Bruce Harris, who at the time worked for Crown Publishing. Bruce Harris had heard Ram Dass lecture just the once. They met to discuss the bare bones of the book, Be Here Now. So persuaded was Bruce Harris by the book proposal from Ram Dass that when his boss at Crown Publishing initially rejected it, Ram Dass says this of what Bruce Harris did next. Bruce went home, and the next day he went into his boss's office. He said, "Look, there are 3 ways we can deal with this. We can publish the book, or we can do a distribution deal, or I'm going to quit." His mentor looked up in surprise and saw that Bruce was serious. He replied, "Okay, we'll work something out." And of course they did work something out. The book was published and was so successful, Ram Dass says of it, "Little did we know that Be Here Now would become a catalyst for an entire generation. It went on to sell more than 2 million copies. It was carried in the backpacks of thousands of people on their spiritual journey. It would be called the Counterculture Bible and influence seekers as varied as Steve Jobs, George Harrison, and Michael Crichton. A book that sold more than 2 million copies in around 1971, in the days before social media, in the days before mass advertising, before television, radio, and podcast interviews, the days before YouTube, in the days before any kind of mass communication systems such as what we have today existed. Now that is remarkable. The fourth book on my list of books that I recommend to you for your 2023 reading list is Sahara Rose's Discover Your Dharma. In this book, Sahara Rose, who is an Ayurvedic author and hosts a podcast called Highest Self, shows us how to discover our Dharma. So what is our Dharma? Dharma is the Sanskrit word for purpose. Dharma is another word for purpose. Or more accurately, Dharma is our unique purpose in life, our true life's purpose. Sahara Rose says of this, "Your Dharma is not just your career, it's so much deeper than that. Your job is a drop of water and Dharma is the ocean. It's not a title and you can't add it to your LinkedIn page or resume," she says. It's about tapping into your frequency, the one only you can emit. Your Dharma is the role you play in this life that combines all your strengths, your passion, and your aptitude into one. The book continues, imagine your Dharma as your mission statement and your career as an offering you provide. And Sahara Rose has a unique approach on how we go about finding our purpose, our Dharma. She invites us to discover our Dharma through our doshas. Doshas are the Ayurvedic mind-body types. Before I describe what is meant by a dosha and Ayurveda, let's talk first about why we even want to find our life's purpose. This goes back to the happiness factor. Baptist Pape, in his book, The Power of the Heart, describes what happiness is and what it is not. What it is not is something to be found in the external, for example, in material possessions. What happiness is something that comes from within. It comes from our hearts. But how do we get there? In fact, how do we even know that we need to get there? Sahara Rose, in Discover Your Dharma, sets out a cool little checklist of 6 things that may characterize what happiness is and what happiness is not. The list says, happiness is not waiting for life to get good. Instead, happiness is creating the life you desire. Happiness is not escaping from reality. Happiness is changing your reality. Happiness is not a destination, it's a journey. Happiness is not always having a smile on your face. Instead, happiness is sometimes the fire in your heart that fuels you to change. Happiness is not avoiding challenges. Instead, happiness is choosing the challenges that will bring you to further truth. Happiness is not keeping your best ideas to yourself. Instead, happiness is seeing others benefit from you sharing your gifts. If any of these descriptions of what happiness is not resonates with how you are feeling about your life right now, then it might be time to start exploring your purpose, your dharma. If, for example, we are waiting for life to get good, or we find ourselves frequently escaping reality, by, for example, a never-ending loop of Friday evening happy hours, where that's the one major thing we look forward to in the week, and I know this, I've been there, I was there for a long time, then I suggest it's time to take a breath, pause and look within. What's really going on there? And looking at what's really going on there doesn't have to be as scary or overwhelming as it may sound. It can be as simple as picking up a book, such as Discover Your Dharma, which is another easy read, and just starting with that and seeing where it goes. Nothing more and nothing less. So, back to the doshas and to Ayurveda. What is a dosha and what is Ayurveda? Let's look at Ayurveda first. WebMD.com describes Ayurveda in the following way. Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurveda for short, is one of the world's oldest holistic whole-body healing systems. It was developed more than 3,000 years ago in India. It's based on the belief that health and wellness depend on a delicate balance between the mind, body, and spirit. Its main goal is to promote good health, not fight disease. but treatments may be geared towards specific health problems. The article continues to say this: those who practice Ayurveda believe every person is made of 5 basic elements found in the universe: space, air, fire, water, and earth. About the connection between Ayurveda and doshas, the article says, these elements of space, air, fire, water, and earth combine in the human body to form 3 life force energies called doshas. They control how your body works. So, the 3 doshas where the elements combine are the Vata dosha, which represents air and space, the Pitta dosha, which represents fire, and the Kapha dosha, which represent water and earth. Sahara Rose says of the connection between Ayurveda and doshas that she realized the doshas and the Ayurvedic types tell us about so much more than our health. They inform us of our dharmas. Putting this connection into practice, particularly into the practical side of discovering our dharma, the author has teased out the traits of each dosha based on the Ayurvedic elements, and with that she has devised a quiz which comprises multiple choice questions and answers, and the answers to these questions get us closer to knowing our dharma, our true life's purpose. The quiz that is contained in the book asks various questions about our strengths, how we react to things such as stress, and the way in which we work, along with other great questions. There's a version of the quiz on Sahara Rose's website if you want to check it out. You can do that at iamsahararose.com. For those of you listening on the podcast, please take a look at my show notes for the details on the websites and books that I'm discussing in this show. I spoke at length. In fact, I dedicated the entirety of my 3rd show to finding our true life's purpose, and I invite you to head to my podcast, available now on Spotify, to have a listen to that. I said on that show that in knowing our purpose in life, in acting out that purpose, we gain a benefit beyond feelings of satisfaction and a sense of well-being. It's reported on TonyRobbins.com that research has linked knowing our purpose in life to living longer. TonyRobbins.com says, researchers surveyed nearly 7,000 older adults on the relationship between mortality and finding your purpose. Participants who did not have a strong sense of meaning in their lives were more than twice as likely to die prematurely as those who had figured out their life purpose. Having a sense of purpose also reduced the incidence of cardiovascular events like heart attack and stroke. Deepak Chopra, the author of the foreword to Sahara Rose's book, Discover Your Dharma, says of the book, Discover Your Dharma is a timely book to help readers decondition their minds, remember their essence, and step into the purpose they were born to express. Today, more than ever, the world is calling forth citizens to uplift humanity through the path of joy and fulfillment. This book ignites the spark that exists in all of us to share our gifts and to be of service. Deepak Chopra says, may this book help you remember your limitless potential and live each day in alignment with your dharma. You can't get much more of a resounding yes to a book than this write-up. Anything that takes us closer to finding our true life's purpose is of great value, and with that, I highly recommend you read this book. The next book that I want to talk to you about is a book that kind of helped me to save my life. On my first show, Hurricane to Healing, I spoke about Navy SEAL William McRaven's speech about making your bed. I came across this speech whilst I was in the depths of despair, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and when I had fallen into a deep depression. In his talk, Admiral McRaven says that we should always make our bed because you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made, and a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. The book that accompanies his speech is called Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life, and Maybe the World. In his book, Admiral McRaven builds on the core principles that he laid out in his speech. He provides 10 principles he learned during his Navy SEAL training that have helped him to overcome challenges in both his professional and personal life. And this is a lovely little book, just 130 pages long, so nice and easy to carry around, and also a nice, easy read. I am going to talk to you about the first 5 principles discussed by Admiral McRaven to give you a flavour of what he's saying. And if you like what you hear, I'll let you read all 10 principles for yourself. So, what are the first 5 principles, as told to us by Admiral McRaven? The first is start your day with a task completed. Admiral McRaven starts with the importance of making our bed. He says that by making our bed, at the end of the day it would be a reminder that I had done something well, something to be proud of, no matter how small the task. He goes on to say, throughout my life in the Navy, making my bed was the one constant that I could count on every day. And I can totally relate to this. In the depths of my PTSD, when I heard Admiral McRaven's speech about the importance of making our bed, about the importance of starting the day with a task completed, I started to do exactly that. I started, or rather restarted, making the bed, something that I had stopped doing when I was unwell. And not only did I make the bed, I viewed the act of making the bed as an accomplishment, my first accomplishment for that day. And it started, little by little, to make me feel just a little better about everything. I strongly feel that it's in the commitments to the simplest of tasks that we start to see the smallest of changes occur. And it's in the smallest of changes built on top of each other one by one. That's when the big changes can slowly start to manifest. The second principle is, you can't go it alone. This one is about the value and importance of teamwork and of being there for each other. Admiral McRaven recounts a story from his Navy training days. He talks about how in the early days of SEAL training, the recruits were required to carry a 10-foot rubber raft with them everywhere they went. And not only would they have to carry this heavy, cumbersome raft everywhere they went, they would have to place it on their heads as they ran through the barracks. They would be required to paddle it endlessly from north to south along the coastline of where they were training. Admiral McRaven recounts that occasionally they would be one man down due to sickness or injury. On those days, the remaining recruits would have to work extra hard to keep this rubber raft with the group. He says, the small rubber boat made us realize that no man could make it through training alone. Having recounted the extraordinary story of an accident he had, in which Admiral McRaven's pelvis separated from his torso due to being entangled in a parachute, the chapter concludes with him saying, none of us are immune from life's tragic moments. Like the small rubber boat we had in basic SEAL training, it takes a team of good people to get you to your destination in life. You cannot paddle the boat alone. Find someone to share your life with, make as many friends as possible, and never forget that your success depends on others. The third principle, in Make Your Bed, is only the size of your heart matters. In this chapter, Admiral McRaven recounts the story of Tommy Norris, who was someone seemingly was physically frail, but who had on successive nights gone deep behind enemy lines to rescue 2 drowned airmen. On another mission, Admiral McRaven says that Tommy Norris had been shot in the face and rescued, and had battled back from his injury to be accepted into the FBI's first hostage rescue team. With that, Admiral McRaven concludes that it's the size of your heart that counts, not how possibly small and physically frail you might be. The fourth principle, life's not fair, drive on. About this, the author says, it is easy to blame your lot in life on some outside force, to stop trying because you believe fate is against you. It is easy to think that you were raised, how your parents treated you, or what school you went to is all that determines your future. Nothing could be further from the truth. The common people and the great men and women are all defined by how they deal with life's unfairness. Helen Keller, Nelson Mandela, Stephen Hawking, Malala Yousafzai. The fifth principle is failure can make you stronger. In July 1983, Admiral McRaven found himself fired from his squadron. He says about this, at that point in my career, I had 2 options, quit and move on to civilian life, or weather the storm and prove to others and myself that I was a good SEAL officer. I chose the latter. Then, in 2002, Admiral McRaven found himself on active duty in combat overseas. He says of this, over the next several years, I stumbled often. But for every failure, for every mistake, there were hundreds of successes, hostages rescued, suicide bombers stopped, and countless lives saved. So, to conclude, on today's show, I have given you guys my review of the 5 books that I think it would be great for you to read in 2023. Of course, there are so many other excellent books by so many other inspirational individuals about which I could have spoken, and I'll probably do another show like this one, perhaps a summer book review for your summer reading list. If that's something you'd like, then please let me know. I value your feedback so much, so please do reach out to me at shuvradeb82@gmail.com, spelt SHUVRADEB, the numbers 82@gmail.com. The books I've spoken about and reviewed today are The Power of the Heart by Baptista Pape, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Being Ram Dass by Ram Dass and Rameshwar Das, Discover Your Dharma by Sahara Rose, and Make Your Bed by Admiral William McRaven. In doing this show, I realised something that I'd not realised until now. One of the overriding themes in most of the 5 books is the concept of coming back to the heart, the need to be connected to and in touch with our hearts, and in the case of The Body Keeps the Score, the need to come back to the body after experiencing an event of trauma. If any of the topics I have discussed today have affected you, please do reach out to someone, whether that's a friend or a professional support service. Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services here in the Cayman Islands and can be reached on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support to people up to the age of 30, and their information is on their website, alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices provides mental health support also here in the Cayman Islands, and their number is 922-3847, and their email is info@lsv.support. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember to tune in right here every Thursday at 2 p.m. on Bobo FM 89.1, where my show drops first. And if you happen to miss me on the radio, you can catch me on my newly launched podcast, Shuvra Deb With You, which is now available on Spotify and will soon be available on Apple Podcasts and on Google. Please do have a listen, which you can do so on demand. And please do go ahead, subscribe, share and review my show. As always, I really appreciate all of your feedback, so please do let me know your views. And if you're enjoying my content, tell your friends about my show. As ever, I will see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for listening to Shuvra Deb With You. And please do tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. on Bobo FM 89.1 for more topics related to and relevant to mental health. If any of you would like to reach out to me directly about any of the issues I've discussed, please do email me at shuvradeb82@gmail.com. That's spelt SHUVRADEB, the numbers 82@gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening.